Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today. And I wanted to also thank J-Sei again for being our co-sponsor on a series of events that the Friends of Topaz Museum has been putting on here at J-Sei. And I just wanted to ask first, how many people here have ever been to the Topaz Museum in Utah? Show of hands. Yay, thank you so much for going, because it's a bit of a trek to get out there. But Topaz Museum is located in Delta, Utah, and it's 16 miles away from the actual historic site where the camp once was. But for those of you who have an interest in going and checking out both the site and the museum, we really recommend going to the museum to get an overview, to see the artifacts, to read people's stories. But it is free and open to the public all year round. We're closed on Sundays, though. And we really encourage people to come to learn the story about what happened in Topaz, what happened to the 126,000 people of Japanese descent during World War II, and how they were affected by Executive Order 9066. One quick thing I do want to say about the board is that we opened the museum just only in 2017, but it was a long, decades, generation-long process of having artifacts brought to Topaz and left with Jane Beckwith, who was the founder, and us building and fundraising to build an actual museum. So the board today has, the responsibility not only for the site, but the stories and those artifacts. It's our responsibility to share that with the community and make sure that people have access to all of this at all times. So. Just again, that's a little bit about Topaz. We do have a table over here. If you have, and Kei Yatabe, I want to say thank you, Kei, who's also a board member here. Diane Fukami, who's also in the audience, also a board member. And I also want to call out Ruth, who has been the mastermind behind Topaz Stories, which has been collecting so many Topaz family narratives and putting this onto an incredible website for people to access very easily because it's online. So without further ado, I just wanted to go straight into our guest speaker for today, John Esaki. So I used to work with John at the Japanese American National Museum, what you called the golden years. It was sometime in maybe 10 years ago. And I don't know if very many people are familiar with John, so I have a couple quick fun facts about John Esaki. So John is a filmmaker. He has identified with Los Angeles for many, many decades, but he's actually a Cal Bear. I did not know this. He graduated in 1973 from UCB in English, fun fact. He also taught 6th, 7th, and 8th graders reading, healthing, and typing for 5 years in Carmel, California. This is news information, right? Before he went on and pursued an MFA in film at UCLA. So under Professor Bob Nakamura, who had just recently founded Visual Communications, which is kind of a foundational nonprofit organization for Asian Americans filmmaking and storytelling, he was volunteered to work as a production assistant with Bob on the feature film Hito Hata Raised the Banner, which came out in 1980, and eventually became involved in the script making. And I understand, having just seen the documentary Third Act by Tad Nakamura, this was one of the first, if not the first, feature film, like stories of Japanese American narrative. I understand that John got hooked on film and has been SoCal for more than 50 years now. He worked for 20 years at Visual Communications and is the filmmaker. He has directed such films as Yuki Shimoda, Asian American actor, Maceo, Demon Drummer from East LA, and Stand Up for Justice, my favorite. A short film about Ralph Lazo, a Mexican American high school student who voluntarily followed his classmates into Manzanar in 1942. So over many, many years, John has been working as a freelance videographer and sound recordist, and counts himself lucky to have worked with prominent Bay Area filmmakers such as Lonnie Ding, Michael Chin, Stephen Okazaki, who's in the audience today. Hi, Stephen. Emiko Omori, Spencer Nakasako, Curtis Choi, and Wayne Wang. So John just retired in 2024 from JANM. Sad, but thank you, John. I mean, really, 25 years. where he was on staff and like kind of the director. He was the director of the Watase Media Arts Center and oversaw all of those oral histories, all the documentaries, any films that came out of it. He's kind of the glue. So I'm so grateful to have been able to work with him. And then later on, you became part of the development in Philanthropy Office, something I didn't know. And now he's currently a volunteer. He's already turned in his regular outfit for the JANM Purple, which is the color of the purple volunteer colors. And then he's working with the renovation at JANM right now, since they've closed the pavilion, are redoing the main exhibits, and conducts the museum's plucky ukulele band. So, without any further ado, I'm going to just bring John up to tell us about your storied career in filmmaking. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Patricia. You know, working with Patricia at the museum, that was 10 years ago. But that was, Patricia was working on the team to remake the Japanese-American core exhibition that is currently being replaced now, finally 10 years after that process was begun. But there's been so much research and discussion over what the new Japanese-American narrative should include. So much more has happened since the museum was first built in the 1990s, you know, so we're all looking forward to the fruits of the new exhibition that Patricia's team began the work on, really. So thank you for that introduction, Patricia. It's so nice to be here. I'm really impressed with this facility, my first visit here. It's really a spectacular gathering place. And I thank Jill and Kimmy and Patricia and the staff of J-Sei for making this opportunity happen for me. As Patricia mentioned, I've retired from the museum after working there for 25 years. And so in my retirement, I have been occasionally thinking about the path that brought me through my experiences to this point. And I will show you some images and some video to illustrate what I'm talking about here. This first image is my dad, George Teruo Esaki. And I have to say, thinking about it, really my dad was a great influence on the direction I took in life, because he was a photographer in Monterey, California. He ran a little photo shop on Main Street in Monterey. And my earliest memories are visiting him at his shop and going into the dark room. You know, in those days, they processed film and photographs in these chemical baths, and you had to do it in the dark, right? So I would go into the dark room, and my dad would do things like take a sheet of photo paper and put a coin on the paper and flash the light quickly, and then slide this photographic paper into the first bath, and you'd see the image come up like magic on this paper. So, of course, that was fascinating for a young boy, and so I think that's really started my interest in making images happen, you know. So I owe a lot to my dad. And another thing is I feel like my personality kind of reflects his many lessons. He was disabled as a child. Turns out that when my grandmother went on a trip to Japan with him when he was a young boy, he contracted a polio-like condition from drinking unpasteurized milk. And so one leg didn't develop fully, so he was always hobbling one leg almost 2 inches shorter than the other, but he never really mentioned this as a disability. He just kind of went on with life, had a very optimistic personality, and I think both my brother and I kind of have that approach to life as like, whatever's out there, you deal with it and kind of go on, as he did. He was very active in the Monterey Japanese community. And during the war, I wanted to share this next picture. It's actually from the exhibit in the next gallery. Is the Esakis, although they were in Monterey, they decided to try to move inland to escape the initial evacuation order. And so my grandmother, who's furthest on this side of the screen, Fusano Esaki, that's my dad next to her, they decided to go inland to Winters, California, where my grandmother was a good friend of Mrs. Kawasaki, whose daughter married into the Kato family, who you see on the main group that they're standing with. And so this was a lifelong friendship of my grandmother. So somehow they went to Winters to try to avoid being sent to camp. However, it turned out Winters was in the final evacuation area, so they were sent to the Turlock Assembly Center, which this picture was taken at Turlock, and eventually they went to Gila River, Arizona. So actually there are members of the Kato family here today, the Kato Kozen family. Can you raise your hand so we see who you are? So, our families have been bound together for decades now, and their grandmother and my grandmother were best friends forever because their husbands had passed away early. And so I think knowing this story kind of was also one of the formative influences on my life. Let me go back. This is my mother's family in Gila River, Arizona camp. My mom is in the middle front row. She was the youngest of 4 sisters, and they were from Gardena, where they were a farm family. And they ended up going to Gila River by way of Santa Anita Assembly Center. And my mom and dad met at Gila, and they were married right after they got out of camp in LA in 1946. And what's interesting is the place they got married was the old Nishi Honganji Buddhist temple, which was the original building of the Japanese American National Museum, where I worked for so many years. And so every day going to work, I was kind of reminded, my mom and dad got together here at this museum, basically. So I like telling that story. And a lot of their artifacts and photo albums are in the collection of the museum now. So as Patricia mentioned, I became a school teacher initially, and I think that's partly, again, the influence of my father is neither my mom or dad were able to go to college. My mom graduated high school that year of the evacuation notice, so she went to Gila right when she was 18 years old. And my dad, he and his brother Haruo were the sole providers for my grandmother because her husband had passed away. So neither of them went to college. But my dad he was a pretty smart guy, and at Gila, he earned a teaching certificate at the local college nearby Gila. And so he was able to teach school in camp. And I think that impacted me on my career choice initially as like, teaching. They would be really happy if I went into teaching, my parents. And plus, I was a terrible student in high school. I used to get C's and D's in science, and English in particular was very vexing for me because I came from a family that did not discuss art or culture in very much depth. We'd look at a picture, nice picture, move on to the next. But in the westernized education system, you have to be good at discussion and analyzing. And why did Mark Twain write this particular paragraph at this? I was terrible. I was clueless in high school. So I went to the local community college, Monterey Peninsula College, and there was an English teacher who finally rescued me from despair and really encouraged me to read and thoughtfully analyze literature, right? So I said, hey, okay, well, I can do this, and I should become a teacher in order to enlighten students coming up who might have the same issues that I had growing up, that they didn't really understand the system of how the American education system wants you to be critical and analytic and blah, blah, blah. So I majored in English and transferred to Cal here in the English department and got my degree and got my teaching certificate and taught. Here's a picture of me with my fellow faculty at Carmel Middle School. And I did teach typing, and I thought I brought a lot of innovation to the teaching of typing. It was one of those, if you're a new teacher in your 20s, you get assigned all the classes that nobody else wants to teach, right? So typing is, you got a room full of people, probably 30 or 40 people. Everyone has their typewriter. When everyone's typing at once, it's like such a clatter. But I would develop these little exercises to increase their speed and so forth. So it came in handy later, actually, as I'll show, when I decided to take a leave of absence from teaching when I was 28 years old. I had taught for 5 years, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And frankly, I was exhausted because kids that age are just brutally honest, and they have their own way of approaching life situations apart from any reason or logic, I think. So if I was going to stay in teaching, at least I wanted a master's degree so I could rise in the teacher pay schedule to make it all worthwhile. So after 5 years, I was able to take a leave of absence and apply to school for a master's. And as a lark, I said, oh, one of my applications I'll make to film school because I won't have to write papers like I had to write as an English major. And so I applied to these film schools in LA, and I was astonished to be accepted to UCLA, the film school. And at that time, I think UCLA, they were more documentary focused as opposed to feature narrative films. So I'm figuring that's why I got in, because I, made this nice spiel in my application about how I was interested in educational film, blah, 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 I'm a teacher, da, da, da. So I got in, but that decision really changed my life completely. And so I showed up at UCLA, and the first production class I signed up for was under Professor Robert Nakamura. And I didn't know who Bob was at that time. I had very little knowledge of Asian American studies or history or anything. I was just, wanted to learn how to make a film. And I saw on the course listings, Nakamura. Oh, sounds a Japanese name. Maybe I'll sign up for this class, And that was truly one of the most amazing choices I've ever made, because Bob was an accomplished photographer, filmmaker who had, as Patricia mentioned, he founded Visual Communications. And anyway, his first film that he showed in class was a documentary of his own Issei father. And I was so blown away by that film, because here was a guy making a film about his own family, his own family experience, and I hadn't even thought of that before. So taking that class with Bob, I learned so much. And during the class, Bob would recruit his students to volunteer on this current production that he was working on, which was Hito Hata, Raise the Banner, the first feature-length attempt to chronicle the Japanese-American experience. So I'm going to show a short clip. It's divided into 3 parts. One is the intro to Hito Hata, where you kind of get the story. And the middle part is this one scene, which is the first scene I ever got to participate in as a production assistant. And then there's a last scene I'm very fond of that I'll explain after you see it. So.
The first of us came to this country over 100 years ago. We called ourselves Issei, the first generation of Japanese in America. I didn't come to get rich. I wanted just enough to return to my village in Kagoshima and maybe buy some land. We Issei called it Hito Hata Ageru. Raise a single banner. The dreaded night blindness had struck some of us. Muto never saw what hit him.
吉川、布団を運ぶもの持ってこい。ボスが見とるからな。お前ら早くしろ。ボスが見とるからな。
Look, once he's up the line, it's out of my hands. Come on, let's get the men fed and bedded down. The excitement's over.
みんな聞いたか？ムタはポートランドの病院で十分な手当てを受けるとボスが今約束してくださった。さあ、みんなキャンプに戻って一眠りでもしろ。
嘘つきもん、お前はみんなを騙したバー。
俺は誰にだって言いたいことを言うとる。理由があればな。
理由？無党の命が理由だ。
奴らはお前たちをこき使うことか知ってないんだ。
黙れ、俺たちは人間だ。動物じゃなかと。
そうだ、よく聞けよ。お前は頭の出来がいいんだ。みんなお前を慕ってるじゃないか。ああ、仕事さえすればいいんだ。しょばるな。
何よこのメランツが。
よく聞けよ。俺は銭を貯めてきたんだ。もう1年辛抱すりゃな、国へ帰って錦を飾ることができるんだ。
その代わり俺たちはのたれ死にか。
よく聞けよだ。俺が帰るときにな、お前を推薦してやろう。金の世の中だ。バカな真似をするな。
そう、無党が連れて行かれる。
そうかもしれん。お前もそうなるんだぞ。こんなひどい国に来たら誰でもくさばってしまうんだ。
おい、減らず口を叩くな。貴様は奈落の底へでも落ちていけ。
さすがの腐ったね。いいこと教えてやろうか。俺らはもう地獄にいるんだぞ。聞いたか、視察の短絡者。俺らはもう座落の底にいるんだぞ。
Don't worry. With copper therapy, he'll get better.
All right.
Oda-san, you have a visitor. このブランケットをかけておいてね。あんまり無理をしないのよ、おじさん。もうちょっとで戻りますから。
Hey, that was a pretty good Nihongo for Sansei, yeah?
So that scene where Mako and Yuki Shimoda are going at each other and fighting, that was the first production I ever got to witness on the set. You know, I was a school teacher from Monterey who was at UCLA, and I volunteered to go on this production, which was out at Bishop near Manzanar. And there were all kinds of problems with this shoot. If you listen to this scene, there's a flapping of gels in the background because they were trying to light the blue light of nighttime, and the wind was making so much noise. It was terrible sound. And I remember sitting in the truck with Bob Nakamura, and he was in despair that things weren't going right. You know, everything was, and the actors were fudging their lines. They were not, you know. But anyway, to me, it was such a difference from school teaching and the everyday grading papers for homework and so forth. So this is part of the magic of film, as they say, that eventually convinced me to leave teaching and stay in Los Angeles to pursue more projects like this. And also the other reason is, you notice that last clip is the nurse in that scene is my wife, Amy Kato. And, you know, I was captivated by the nurse in the scene as well. So, anyway, I always kid Amy because it looks like she's really shoving Mako down much too hard for that scene. But anyway, that kind of spunk really appealed to me. So anyway, we've been together ever since, and Amy has been the producing partner on many of my films that I've worked on, and we're life partners as well. And I'll talk a little bit more in some other slides. But moving on, there's a shot of the two directors, Dwayne Kubo and Bob Nakamura. Dwayne is actually from Northern California, San Jose, and after he retired, he taught at Cabrillo College, I think, for a few years, and he still does. De Anza College, okay, and still does video for San Jose J-Town issues and events. And the great thing about visual communications at the time is you had the opportunity to do anything you wanted to on these productions. Because the budget was so low, you weren't getting paid, but at least you could do what you were interested in. And so I did everything from man the slate in front of the camera to do production assistance. And then that's how I ended up. I have a screenwriting credit on Hito Hata. And it's interesting because I'm grateful to Bob and Dwayne that they gave me that credit, but really it was because I was such a great typist that I got that role. And you know where I got that. And well, it's true. We had, you know, visual communications operated very much as a collective. And so no individual person really took responsibility for a decision. It was all a group process. So you would sit in a room debating the script points with a group of 10 to 15 people sometimes, and you'd be scribbling notes frantically, like Betty says we should do this in that scene, and Takashi says we should maybe do this to cover this. So my job was to take notes and to type it out. And so I was very good. We had a Selectric typewriter, you know, with a little ball on it, and so I would furiously be typing the notes for the script, and occasionally I would suggest to Bob, well, why don't we name that character Tatsumi or something? As I remember certain names from growing up in Monterey. And so he would take these suggestions. Mostly it was Bob Nakamura and his family recollections of Kagoshima. His, father came from Kagoshima. But I'm very grateful. It was such an opportunity, and I do have a screenwriting credit on this film that ended up being pretty a significant achievement in Asian American media. So this led to my next project, which I have a clip of, is a documentary on the actor who you saw in that scene, Yuki Shimoda. And let's take a look at that.
Yuki, can you tell us when did you first realize that you wanted to be an actor?
Before you were born, right? Would you believe when I was 7 years old, I was in church, and the teacher was going to start a conversation or a speech on something. He said, I'm sure that none of you know exactly what you want to be or what you intend to do in life. And I raised my hand and I said, I do. I want to be an actor.
There was this great desire in Yuki to really be an actor's actor. And the thing that I appreciated about him always was he was never satisfied with a role that he played and was always striving to perfect his art.
He was one of the first Asian Americans ever on Broadway. In a show called High Button Shoes, he was a chorus dancer.
He was always going to classes, workshops to study and to prepare, because unlike white actors, we don't have opportunities or privileges to fail.
He'd really give so much of himself that you would see what kind of a life an actor's life really was if you committed to it.
He was probably one of the most insecure actors I've ever had to deal with. Maybe it was because of the frustration, of the limitation, and the many obstacles that he had to go over.
I said I want my radio back now. I want an American to fix it.
When he was in his teens, he had to go to the internment camp. That's the period he was preparing to be a performer. So not only his preparation was interrupted, but also one has to consider what that kind of experience does to the psyche of a younger person.
You know I'm loyal to the United States. My only son serves in the army.
A Jap's a Jap.
We both studied ballet, jazz, and tap under Miss Evelyn Earle. And after several months of training, we became a team. And Yuki, of course, he was a very creative person, and he was responsible for putting on this great big cabaret show, for instance. So the life became more exciting, and I'm sure the internees it kind of lifted their morals up, too.
What are we gonna do? We're on our way to somewhere, the three of us and you. What'll we see there? Who will be there? What'll be the big surprise?
There may be caballeros with dark and flashing eyes. We're on our way.
We're on our way.
Pick up your pack.
Pack up your pack.
And if we stay.
Yuki was always bursting his belt, so as to speak, at playing many of these stereotypic roles. We had the talent and the ability if only given a chance.
I believe that every actor should do a leading role in a play. And that was how East-West Players Workshop was functioning anyway, trying to develop actors. So I was directing a play by John Shirota called Pineapple White, in which he played a leading role of an Issei immigrant. And that's when he discovered how demanding it was for an actor to be carrying the show, so to speak. He really put himself on the line, and he became more open, more honest with himself.
To all of a sudden utilize all the things that I had learned just recently and put it to work. And also all the experiences I had in camp, watching all these poor Issei's dreams shattered, that we were able to at least try to bring forth what we felt was the truth at the time. To me, Manzanar was really a role.
As actors and actors, you know, whatever roles play is real. It might be, you know, just a movie, but it's at this time that's really real. To him, that was a real story, that he was a man, and he did have family. He did have grandchildren. And so for him, that was the most happiest time and happiest movie that he ever made.
If we don't fight for something we believe, then it's no good. We're just here wasting time.
I said we go for a ride.
So that documentary I did as my thesis film at UCLA, and you know, I learned so much making that film, and looking back, you know, I was so clueless as to how to shoot interviews in a more, you know, effective way, and I just kind of took the camera in, and Yuki Shimoda was very ill. And his friends had gathered together the funding to do this piece on his life. And so, you know, being a graduate student, I said, okay, well, I'm willing to jump in and try to do this production. But, you know, I didn't really know that much about creating a documentary. So I was learning along the way, and I wish I had made Yuki compose the frames differently, and there's a lot of regrets you have of your early work that you don't quite have the chops to do it, but you do it anyway. And so I'm glad we were able to document this actor's life, and you know, having gotten to know him on Hito Hata, I was happy that we're able to document some of the struggles he went through in his life. Well, it's me. So, as I say, learning documentary was a challenge, and fortunately, I had many senseis throughout my life that really generously gave to me a lot of knowledge about how to make films. And one of the earliest was Lonnie Ding, who was from the Bay Area. She taught at Cal, Berkeley, and she did a number of documentaries, and she really had this passion about doing a documentary on the 442-100th, the Japanese American military unit from World War II. And I forget the exact circumstances, but I ended up working on her production. I think I was working at that time at Visual Communications, and the salary was not that great, so we were all taking outside jobs to supplement our income. And whenever Bay Area filmmakers would come to LA, they'd come to Visual Communications because it was a resource in Los Angeles for Asian American filmmakers. And Lonnie, I think, came to record an interview in LA and hired me as a sound recordist from VC. And it turned out the person operating the camera was Michael Chin, who's also from the Bay Area. And so somehow Michael took a liking to my assistant tasks that I helped him out with, and he would hire me on these various productions. So I was able to learn a lot as a crew member on these various productions. And so, like, here's a shot of Wayne Wang's Dim Sum. And in this shot, you'll see Michael and Wayne, and that's actually Emiko Omori, another prominent Bay Area filmmaker who's behind the camera with her head kind of down. But, working with all these great filmmakers was such an education for me. I really indebted to them for the generosity that they showed in helping us. This next guy, actually, I'm always surprised that Spencer Nakasako started off as my assistant on Dim Sum Part 2. It was shot over 2 summers, and the camera team has the main camera person and then an assistant, and then Spencer was an assistant on the camera team. So now this guy is a big shot executive producer. He recently produced the film Third Act, which premiered the other evening here at CAM's Film Festival. And I don't know, I think he's done pretty well for himself since those days of being a camera assistant. That's another guy I was able to meet through this network of Asian American filmmakers. Oh yeah, actually, let's go back to that a second. Spencer and I are both from Monterey, California, so there must be something in the water of Monterey that encourages people to go into this field of filmmaking and documentaries. I was also fortunate to be hired by Mr. Stephen Okazaki, who, I was working at VC, and I think similar to Lonnie, Stephen was in LA looking for someone to help him shoot a documentary on Estelle Ishigo, the artist who documented Heart Mountain. And she was a Caucasian woman who was married to a Japanese person who was put in camp. And so Stephen hired me as a sound recordist to do this interview of Estelle. So we go to Estelle's, the place, the facility she's staying, and at that point she was not very verbal. She was in probably advanced state of dementia. But I think Stephen captured a nice shot of her just sitting in her room looking out the window, which plays a prominent part in the film. But there was no real sound to be used from that because she didn't speak or anything. But I'm grateful that I have the credit on Days of Waiting, an Academy Award-winning film that I could, again, I just happen to be in the right place at the right time, and through the generosity of my colleagues, I've gained some attention for the work I supposedly did on these productions. Anyway, but I also I have another clip related to Steve's help also. So let's I think my next clip. Whoop, I'm going backwards. So during this time, I was working on my own personal documentary about a teenager from East LA, Maceo Hernandez, who showed an interest early in playing the taiko. And so I was shooting this documentary over a number of years. So I wanted to show two clips. The first one is kind of the beginning of the documentary, which sets up his situation.
I was in Japan, and I was at my high school, and the teacher said, where are you from? And I said, Los Angeles. And she goes, well, what part of Los Angeles? There's different little cities. And I said, East Los Angeles. And she said, oh. And she told the class something in Japanese. And she said, oh, that's a place where there's a lot of how do you say, mafia and gangsters and crime and drugs. And I kind of laughed, and I smiled, and I looked at her, and I go, no, that's not it at all. I said, East Los Angeles is my home. It's a beautiful place. There's many families there. My culture is there. My people are there. I said, there's gangsters in Osaka. I says, and there's gangsters in Tokyo, and there's gangsters anywhere around the world. And at that point, I realized that there is this image of East Los Angeles. East Los Angeles は僕のラサ、それは僕の家、僕のファミリー、それはイーストロサンゼルです。The first time I got into drumming was through taiko, the Japanese drum. And now I do congas and timbales. But the taiko was the first drumming I ever did. And the first time I remember seeing taiko was at a wedding, a Japanese wedding. And there was a taiko group that performed there. And that was the first time I remember feeling that much energy and power. You could feel each beat, each time they hit the drum, you could just feel it throughout your body. And it's like took your soul.
Marcel started playing taiko first with our group at Montebello Soul Zenji Temple. When he first started playing with us, he was playing background, the bass on some of our pieces, and some of the percussion instruments. And then he gradually graduated to solos. The group Onne Koza, which was originated by Den-san, toured all over the world, and they were very influential as far as influencing taiko groups in the United States and North America in general. One day, Onde Koza came into town, and we went to their practice, and their director saw Maceo, and he saw his usefulness and his enthusiasm for taiko, and recruited him in his group.
And he also wanted me to go to Japan because they were going to be doing a concert for the emperor, and he was telling me that the old Japanese are very racist, so he wanted to break that gap, and he wanted me to play the big odaiko in front of the emperor and blow him away, so he would say, oh, look, you know, Mexicans can do our art, and, you know, that would shock him. I was only 13, and I was a 9th grader at Robert Louis Stevenson Junior High School.
So, to condense his story, Masao did go to Japan, perform with Ondeko-zen, went through this rigorous training with them, running marathons and playing the taiko, and he suffered a very severe accident running one day, and he had to have his leg amputated. And so he had a lot of difficulty readjusting to life back in LA, but part of the process of adjustment is he felt like he needed to run the New York Marathon as he did when he did before with Ondeko-zen. So this segment shows him preparing for the handicapped portion of the New York Marathon, and his friend who accompanies him to run with him.
I've known Masao for, I'd say, approximately 15 years now, and we grew up together. He asked me out of the blues one day if I would go to New York with him to run a marathon. And I said yes, I would do it, and not realizing what I was getting myself into. I have no previous experience with running a marathon, let alone running even a small 10K or 5K. I had never ran anything. I think it finally hit me the day actually before the marathon. Masao and I went out to Central Park to do a somewhat training, and it was just like, we are training one day before the marathon. You know, this is not going to work.
Achilles Track Club is a group of disabled runners, and we believe in participating with the general public in long-distance running. The first mile is the toughest part of the course. It's steeply uphill, but they are so hyped up that they don't even know it.
And for about half a mile, you're really excited. Then once you hit that 1 mile, you're like, what am I doing? You know, why am I here? What do I got to prove, you know?
The first 4 or 6 miles, he was doing really good. At that point, the mile lines were coming up really fast and we could not feel it yet. And it was about the 10th, between the 10th and 13th, he was starting to feel it at the 10th mile line. To the 13th, he just had to stop and he had to rest. We had him on a cot at the first aid station. We got him a massage. He was really cold. We had to cover him. He was going through like a type of a cold sweat type of deal. He was telling me, I was like, Masao, you cannot give up, not at this point.
She's yelling at me, and I'm like on this little bunker bed. You know, there's all these people who are like out of the race for good, you know, and they're like, she's yelling, you're gonna do it. We didn't come all this way. And all these other people are kind of like looking at her like, sit down, lady, you know. It's over, you know. You did it. You tried to do it, you couldn't do it. I didn't want to go on. I began crying. I was just wiped out physically, mentally. I said, you know what, I did 13 miles. That's, you know, that's good. And now I'll say, you know what, that's great. You know, a lot of people don't even run 13 miles, don't even walk 13 miles. He said, that's great, but we're not finished yet. So she struggled with me for, I think it was close to an hour, the 13th mile, to get up and let's go already. She said, if I gotta drag you, we're gonna finish this.
I started to feel a pain in one of my ankles, and I was beginning to, I think there was a sense of wanting to give up as well. But if I had just lectured this guy at the 13th mile that we were going to get this done together, I couldn't let him down at that point.
You got 2 miles to go, looking good, and you got a downhill coming up. Right away, nice going. Probably the most difficult part of the race are the last 3 miles. It's in Central Park, it's mildly hilly, but after running 23 miles, a mild hill is like a mountain.
You could see the lights, you could see the finish line. Both started crying. I could see Natalie getting tears, and then I started getting tears. It was the same feeling I had the year before. It's like you reach a goal, and now you're finishing it. Even though you've been through so much pain, but you're like, hey, it was easy, you know?
So Maseo still continues to do taiko as a group called East LA Taiko, and he teaches a group at the Budokan Center in Little Tokyo, and still is really involved with both the JA and Latino community in LA. So it's been really amazing to see his growth from a teenager to a fully mature adult musician. This shot, I throw this in there because working at visual communications was a lot of not all just production, but you had to raise money for the organization. And so one of the ideas that Amy and I had was this community chili cook-off in which 8 different community groups would compete for the best chili every summer, and we would combine it with a film screening, therefore the title Chili Visions. And so I think we premiered the Maseo video at Chili Visions. So it was very meaningful to have all these community groups gathered and premiere this film in the Japan America Theater in Los Angeles. And through the years, I think we did Chili Visions for 15 years. And I think I have this image of Stephen Okazaki being a judge one year for the Chili. Do you remember that, Steve? Anyway, we would feature various filmmakers, and they would participate in the food part also. Eventually, so Amy and I lived together for many years, and I don't know, it was just kind of our stubbornness, I guess, that we didn't get married. And so our executive director, Linda Mabalit, unfortunately didn't live to her 50th birthday. She had cancer and was, at the end, I don't know if it was in her delirium or if she was sound of mind, but she told Amy and I to get married as a fundraiser for visual communications.
I went up to John and I said, well, should I tell Linda we're going to get married? And then I said, do you want to get married? And then he said, well, I guess so. And so we told Linda, we're going to get married, so you have to be around so that you can be at the wedding. But it didn't come to be. So we did this fundraiser for VC and had a little short
In
video.
lieu of wedding gifts, please contribute to visual communications. So that's an idea, Jill. If you have anyone who's of marriageable age.
And it was one of the best fundraiser for VC. I mean, Spencer even came down. and Howard and Robin came from London.
So anyway, part of working at a nonprofit definitely is the fundraising, or nicely called development part. And so I did work in development at VC and later at the museum. I was a development officer. So, I mean, that's part of the reality when you go into this field also. So, let's see. We're almost coming to the end. So while working at VC, I started doing more and more assignments for Bob Nakamura and his wife, Karen Ishizuka. And one of the memorable productions was Hawaii in the 1990s, documenting some of the Issei pioneering women of Hawaii. So we're standing with Mrs. Tezawa, who was a plantation worker in Hawaii. We were able to interview her, and also standing next to Amy is Barbara Kawakami, is one of the foremost scholars of Issei experience in Hawaii, who just passed away this past year at the age of 104. So that was another great highlight of our lives. So this next clip, I think it'll be the last clip, is a film that could not have been made without Stephen Okazaki's generous contribution. So.
Every morning when I wake up, before breakfast, I always go down to a newspaper stand nearby and buy the New York Times. Then I go for a walk along the Hudson River on Riverside Drive, a place where I can get a good view of the New Jersey hills. I say my morning prayers there and then return home. As long as the weather isn't too bad, I do this every morning. I am Henry Sugimoto, an artist.
When I see all these leaves, I always think about him because my father would collect different colored leaves on Thanksgiving morning, and he loved to do that. And I was thinking, you know, that's what he would have done next week when it's Thanksgiving. This particular room was his because it has northern light. There's no sunlight or anything that really comes into the room, so the light is always even, and so Dad always painted by daylight. His goal was always to be able to do his art, and whatever that required meant there would be all kinds of sacrifices, that was going to be part of his life because it was a very uncertain one.
I thank my grandfather for the fact that I decided to become an artist stems from my childhood. My father immigrated to the United States when I was an infant, leaving behind my mother, my younger brother, and me. When I was 9, my mother was called to join him. I spent my childhood raised and educated by my grandparents. My grandfather had formerly been a samurai of Kishu, the Wakayama region. When the samurai were outlawed at the beginning of the Meiji period, my grandfather became an ordinary citizen. He was given some money, cut off his top knot, dressed in civilian clothes, and moved to the country. In my grandfather's house where I was raised, I remember many swords, spears, wall hangings, and paintings. I liked copying this art, and my grandfather, sounding impressed, would say, "You drew very well. Try drawing some more." I spent my days joyfully drawing until the age of 18, when I was summoned to join my parents in America.
So that whole opening sequence of Henry Sugimoto walking around his neighborhood in New York, that was all shot by Stephen Okazaki. And he had been working on a project about 3 artists, I believe, including Estelle Ishigo and Minio Okubo and Henry Sugimoto. And so he had this footage. And at the museum, we were doing an exhibition on Henry Sugimoto's work because his daughter had given many paintings to the museum. And so there was a big project with a catalog and exhibition and a video. So I kind of remembered that Stephen had this footage, and I asked him if he might consider us using that footage, and so he generously allowed us to use that footage from his coverage of Henry. So I think it made a big difference in the film, being able to see Henry at work later in life, because the other parts of the documentary have him in camp, painting, and so anyway, very much grateful to you, Stephen, for that. How am I doing on time, Jill? I know I'm running over, I'm talking too much, but okay, so there is one more clip about my work on Stand Up for Justice, the film about Ralph Lazo, who was a teenager, non-Japanese American who voluntarily went to Manzanar with his Japanese American classmates. So this was a project funded by the Civil Liberties Public Education Fund, which was set up after the redress bill was passed. And it was a collaborative project with the NCRR, at that time the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations. So this clip is kind of the making of Stand Up for Justice.
Ralph Lazo's story is really unique.
Ralph? Hey, quit kidding around. You better get off. You'll be stuck going with us to God knows where.
Really, Ralph, these guys mean business.
One person can make a difference by what they do.
We really didn't say, oh, what's that Mexican fellow doing in camp? We didn't think about it.
Who can say that I don't have Japanese blood in my veins?
Ralph Lazo died in 1992, and we didn't start on the film until 1998. And so we had to find out from his friends and from his family what he was like. In our grant, we said we would provide the DVD, the film, and the guide free to teachers in California.
With the idea of making a half-an-hour film for high school. Even though the rifles are not real and the soldiers were barking out words from a script, there were some senseis that felt really intimidated. They said that it felt real, and then they kind of thought about their grandmothers or their parents that were in camp, and several people got really emotional. They also felt a little afraid.
We're just here boarding a train, but this is really, a traumatic experience, which I think, the same thing could happen today.
The first thing I thought of when I came here and saw the train scene and stuff, I thought about my grandmother. I thought about how she was, how she was like 4 years older than I am now, and she had 5 kids. And what she must have been thinking going through that.
We had several meetings with our composer, David Iwataki, and he was very good about crafting a score that reflected elements from both cultures. And then we were also fortunate to have the participation of Quetzal Flores, who has a group called Quetzal, which does more traditional Mexican folk music. So it's very much a collaboration of a Japanese American and a Mexican American composer on the soundtrack for the film.
You asked me why I went. My dad finally understood when I got home from the army and we talked. He told me he was proud of me. You just have to stand by your friends. Stand up for justice.
Linda Mubalit is named as our executive producer. She was our executive director for 23 years from 1980. And in 2003, she had passed away suddenly of lung cancer. Throughout the years that we had working on Stand Up for Justice, she was very supportive. She would say, whatever it takes, Amy, to do it. I trust you and John that you can get this production done. A lot of the highs in Stand Up for Justice is the many people that came on board who volunteered their time. There are things that they didn't have to do, but they did it because they believed in the project and they wanted this film to come out. And then the community at large. We were able to fundraise in a way that I don't think a lot of films could, but when we asked for donation or support, they were more than generous to help us out.
That's a wrap.
So I put this up here, so if you're interested in seeing the full versions of any of these pieces that I've shown clips from, you can either go to the museum's Media Arts Center YouTube channel, or at Visual Communications. They have many of the pieces posted on their website, including the full version of Hito Hata, correct? And Stand Up for Justice also. So we're going to have a conversation with Diane, and I just wanted to update you that even though I retired, I still volunteer at the museum. Recently, I've been helping out with the Hito project, which is the book containing every person who was confined in a camp during World War II. And that book was at the museum for a couple of years, and it still needs several thousand names stamped that are not stamped. So it's been traveling around the country to DC. I think it's coming up to the Bay Area. Early June. So I may come up to help out with that, but that's been very rewarding to use my phone camera to video record people stamping for their families. Once again, as we wrap up, thanks to my family for the support. You know, as I say, working in a nonprofit is not the most financially stable way to live, and so I'm very grateful to my parents and my brother Howard, who's here today, for always being a source of support. So thank you. I need to introduce you. Anyone needs a break after all that,
and there are refreshments over there,
get
too.
Get some refreshments.
So I'm Diane Fukami. I am the president of the, co-president of the Topaz Museum Board, a documentary filmmaker myself, but also a big fan of John Esaki. So I'm really excited to be here today. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation and also entertain many questions from you, because as you have been, I've just been so impressed with the breadth and the depth of John's work. So feel free to ask questions. So I'm going to start off with the first one. John, your breadth of work is just amazing, and what you didn't talk about is your experience in Eyes on the Prize. You worked on 4 productions for Eyes on the Prize, which is the seminal civil rights series that was on PBS about American experience, in addition to just some of what we've seen today. But of all the projects that you've worked on, what's your favorite and why?
Oh, they're all like children, you know. Can you pick a real favorite? Well, you spend so much time on each project, whether it be Hito Hata was produced over 2 or 3 years of, you know, it wasn't shot all in sequence. It was shot in different sequences, and you had to work on putting them in a meaningful order. And Stand Up for Justice, there were grants written multiple times for the script development, the pre-production, production. They're with you for a long time. And Maseo, I was shooting Maseo video for several years over the course of his life. And so how do you pick a favorite? It's
You have 2 or 3 top favorites?
Well, Stand Up for Justice, because it kind of brought together a lot of skills and resources and people that I enjoyed working with. And to have a piece that even years after it was made, it still gets viewed by students and teachers to learn that story.
You know, in your career, you've worked with so many people who are names and have wonderful reputations, not just in the Japanese American community, but also the Asian American community. Talk about what you learned from them. If you can give me like just a phrase from each person you learn from. Lonnie Ding, Stephen Okazaki, Spencer Nagasako, Michael Chin.
Well, Lonnie Ding, persistence. Actually, all of them, persistence. You know, it's such a difficult challenge to each project, putting it together, getting the interviews arranged, gathering the supplemental materials like photographs and home movies. I have been lucky to work at JANM, where they have a lot of the resources in their archive. So there's so many treasures in the museum archive that, you know, just in my 20 years of working in media arts, we recorded so many programs and individual life histories. They're all there for future filmmakers and researchers to discover. And for instance, Ruth Asawa is featured in a retrospective over at San Francisco MoMA. I was able to record an interview with her. I traveled up here with curator of the museum, Karen Higa, to do a lengthy sit-down interview with Ruth Asawa back in 2003, I think. So she was still very lively and articulate, and so I think it's really a great interview, and it's included in the documentary Masters of Modern Design that was produced by the museum after I left the Media Arts Department, but I was still very pleased that they were able to use that interview of Ruth in that current day program, which earned a local LA Emmy Award for its my colleagues Akira Bach and Evan Kodani, who is also from this area.
You know, in many of your films, you were part of a bigger team, and so it was with the Ralph Lazo story where you actually headed the team, you were the director. What kind of transition and how did that change of role work for you?
Amy has worked as my partner and producer for all of these projects, and you know, she handles all the kind of really dirty work of production. The Urusai stuff, she says. Yeah, so she's very good at putting together the logistics, and as a team,
you're very lucky.
Yes, I am I am extremely lucky all through my life as a filmmaker and media person.
Let's take questions from the audience now. Anybody have a question for John? Yes. Oh, he's shooting. He didn't have his hand up. Come on. Spencer, you're never one to...
Right in the front.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
When you do documentaries of real people, they're not actors, you can't tell them what to say. How do you draw the meaningful information and the drama that you need to make a successful film?
A lot of it is editing, and you know, going back to that first documentary I made on Yuki Shimoda, he, in his interview, didn't make sense part of the time. His sentences were very dislocated, and so to figure out a way to combine with supplementary material like still photographs and clips and use selective phrases, you really spend a lot of time it's like a puzzle trying to fit together so it will make sense and be true to the spirit of what he's saying, I think.
Anything else? So tell us a little bit. You've done feature film and you've done documentary. What are the differences between the two that you enjoy or that you want to share?
Well, the documentary is very much discovery. You never know what you're going to discover as you enter a situation. Like, you have expectations like, Mr. Sato has a story about, his camp experience, but when you actually sit in front of Mr. Sato, he may have a totally different way of getting to that story and may mention many other things that are just as interesting or even more interesting than your original premise. So it kind of changes your approach to how the final product is going to be. Whereas, like with Stand Up for Justice, we did script it out, although both Hito Hata and Stand Up for Justice had collaborative screenwriting or script writing, and that's very challenging to get consensus. Like, if we were all to write a script together, you'd have all these different ideas, like, oh, we should have Ralph, when he visited his father after camp for the first time, that would be an incredible scene. That should be in there. And then, you're saying, but it's a 30-minute film. We can't have all the scenes of all his life. So everybody's arguing for their point of view to put in the script. And it's very challenging. That's why if you watch Stand Up for Justice, because the team of writers were all teachers from the LA Unified School District. Oh, we got to have a scene about the evacuation order. We have to have a scene showing the death of a 442 vet. And we have to have a scene, and it's sometimes makes for not the best drama when you're trying to portray a lot of factual information. It's more emotional.
Well, I also noticed that you have a whole lot more patience and desire to work with the community in terms of soliciting that input. There are others who don't have the diplomatic skills that you have, shall we say. and so, that kind of input can awfully be frustrating because sometimes you have conflicting views about the same thing. And so you, as the director or the lead person in charge, have to make some kind of tough editorial decisions, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, you're at the editing console making the decision. And then you screen it for your colleagues, and some of them will like it and some will not like it. So, but you have to lock at some point and go on.
So many people here don't understand sort of the post-production editing process. Let's use Ralph Lazo as an example. How many rough cuts did you have and did you get input on before you locked what ends up being the final product?
We would, on Stand Up for Justice, we would have readings of the script. And, I think the story Amy always points out is we showed it to a group of high school students who just thought it was terrible rubbish that was all contrived, about how...
This was like one of the teacher's sons.
Oh, so one of the teacher's sons.
And he's like sitting there going, oh, yeah, it's the magic bus scene, really? And so we had to rewrite everything. So that really helped the process of having the attorneys and some other audiences that were going to be watching it to get their input. So we did a lot in terms of having community people come in and also have them discuss the script writing part. But when the rough cuts, we actually went to the schools and had various other high schoolers look at it and give us suggestions. Like one person said, well, how did the war end? Because it's so far removed from there. So those kind of things really helped us out. And I also wanted to say about the production, when John said, we need to go to Manzanar and shoot the scenes. I said, really? You really want to do that? So that became a project in itself to get the whole team out there. And I think our production was like the first production after Farewell to Manzanar to have on the site. And so we had to go through a lot of archaeological talks with the superintendent and get their permission for us to shoot on the set.
How long did you shoot on location at Manzanar, do you remember?
Well, it was 5 days, and the first day happened to be December 7th, 2002. And we started in the morning, and we didn't realize that the sun set at 3 o'clock. So we're kind of scrambling around. And so there was a lot of things that was the unknown until we got on the set. And we also need to thank Chris Tashima from Day of Independence, because he was also working on a period piece about the camps, and he helped us build the barracks. So there was a lot of collaboration with other filmmakers and the community, the Latino community, and it's always a process.
Stephen, question? Hold on, microphone's coming. And then I'll get to you.
Well, I had a comment and a question. Firstly, John worked with me for, besides a very short thing on Days of Waiting, John worked with me on my film Troubled Paradise, which was set on the Big Island. He was the camera assistant and did some shooting as well. And we were on the Big Island for two different shoots, and John is incredibly easygoing and a really good assistant camera person. And it was a really good crew, and everyone got along really well. And it was pretty fun. And we did a remarkable amount of shooting with different interviews and all around the Big Island. And it's a big island, so there's a lot of traveling. And John is really easygoing, easy to get along with, but he would, when we were on the one side of the island, he would, several days he would say, I'd really like to get some macadamia nut pie. And we'd go, oh, yeah. And, it's really good. And then, we'd go on with stuff. And then the next day he'd go, I haven't had that macadamia nut pie. And we'd say, John's easygoing. So we'd go, yeah, we haven't. And on the last day on that side of the island, for the first time, there was this tension in John's voice. And he said, I haven't had the macadamia nut pie. And so everything kind of stopped, and I think, I don't remember totally, maybe John does, but I remember it was kind of, we had our meal, everyone was full, and I think I was like, I gave him the keys to the car and said, oh, I'm sorry, I had not taken him seriously. And because he was so polite before, but now it was different. And gave him the keys and said, oh yeah, here, sorry, you can go get the macadamia nut pie. And then when the film showed later, we toured most of the islands and showed the film there. and stopped at this place. It's the Coffee Shack. It's called the Coffee Shack, and they have pretty good salads, pretty good sandwiches, but they have an incredible macadamia nut pie. It's like a pecan pie, but macadamia nuts, and it's incredibly good. And I now then went, oh, that's why.
I'd say you were pretty lucky if that's the only thing it took to make this guy happy.
Yeah. But, you know, I'd never seen him so hostile, though. My question was, I mean, you know, the LA Asian American filmmaking scene seems to me sort of, most of it revolves around visual communications and the scene there, and up here it's, you know, it's mostly, I mean, people are connected, but people are more doing their things differently. You know, people are tied with different communities, and there's a little bit, I mean, there's some connection with what was NATA and now CAM, but people are more, we all mostly know each other, but people are sort of doing different things. And, you know, Diane, you work with, you know, the news, more the news connections, and you know, but we work more independently. Spencer worked a lot with the Southeast Asian community and stuff, but we're not, you know, tied with this organization so much going through, and so it seems to be really different. And also, you know, I think you're one of the very few, there's not that much, you know, interaction between LA and San Francisco in terms of, you know, creative interaction. And you're one of the very few people who has worked up here with several people up here. And I just wonder your insights about the difference and why also there's not that much exchange. Besides you, very few people have worked with, you know, some of the LA people, and vice versa. Do you guys hate us, or do we hate you?
Well, having grown up in Northern California, you know, my parents included, they have a very strong anti-Southern California bias. You know, we root for the Giants and the Warriors.
We're better.
And Southern California steals our water and all kinds of stuff, north, south. But I ended up going into Southern California through these circumstances. I still had those ties up here, and you know, I went to school up here, and I have a warm place in my heart for Monterey and the Bay Area. Yeah, I mean, I think there's mutual suspicion of each other's motives, and that's why I think I was very lucky that I was able to connect with Lonnie and you and Spencer and Michael. And
what do you think that is? I mean, you're being from Northern California.
Possibly,
that
I do have kind of deep inside, I still have a Northern California.
That you can cross that. I mean, I remember when really early on, someone said, oh, you live in LA, when you're down there, you should go visit Visual Communications. And I went, really? And so, like, I called their office, and you guys were working on Hito Hata, right? And so I went down, and someone said, yeah, come down. And I went down, and you guys were in some meeting, and I waited, and someone came out and said, oh yeah, we'll be right with you. And I waited out there for like 2 hours, and then finally, like, this guy came out and said, oh, sorry, and he talked to me, and he said, oh, you know, oh yeah, you know, why don't you come tomorrow? We're doing this scene. You could be an extra or something. And it was it was the protest scene, you know, and it was Mako. It was a contemporary protest scene, which was cut out of the film, you know, which like hundreds of people came out for. Anyway, but then I later realized the guy that came out was Dwayne Kubo. It was from San Jose. Anyway, you don't.
I'm sorry Dwayne couldn't have been here today.
But I suppose you think it's just as sort of simple like that, you know. There's a bit of that.
I think the other thing too is that, to me, visual communication seems in that area much more grassroots and community oriented. And you know, you guys have gotten a lot of funding from CAM. You can dispute this, but CAM seems more nationally, you know, a national organization that wants to fund a lot of different Asian American films. So that feeling of binding the community together doesn't seem quite the same to me. I don't know if you want to comment on that. Or Spencer, you've been doing a lot of stuff with CAM. Is that an inaccurate impression?
I don't know. I mean, I think when it comes to money, then all bets are off, right? Everybody wants a piece of something. So I think you have to you can't really, it was like, BC, I think, was the first Asian American Media Arts Center. Isn't that correct, John?
Yeah.
BC, right? And then CAM came later, but CAM came with PBS backing and therefore had money. So initially, this is boring, but but factually, I think initially there was a little bit of resentment of BC, like, oh shit, these guys up north now are kind of controlling the purse.
I see.
But at the end of the day, CAM was only really controlling money from PBS, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, good point.
So there was a little bit of, I think that was,
right.
You know what I'm saying? I think there was there were the power brokers, and then I think there are like when all that stuff was going on, I was below the line, right? So I didn't give a shit. And I think people like John didn't care. I think the people that got along didn't care about that, right? They just wanted to work. I mean, when I first started, I didn't know nothing. So like John, I was John's assistant, right? So who cares who has the money? I'm just trying to learn. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. We have a question back there, you in the red shirt.
I think Amy should just be up there to fact check you.
I know.
What are you doing now? Are you working on any projects, or do you have plans? Are you mentoring people, or you have time now, right, to do stuff like that?
Well, you know, I have kind of this feeling that I have acquired a lot of information and how to do things, but younger filmmakers really don't want to hear it. I mean, they want to discover their own path, and so I feel like, okay, well, it's as you get, I'm turning 75 next month, and so you get to a certain stage in life, it's like, okay, well, if people don't want to hear what you have to say, fine, you know.
So, John, I'm going to disagree with you because I was sitting here thinking that I think everyone in this room needs to know that John is a very generous filmmaker. And I know this because of the museum and how many interns they have had going through the Watase Media Arts Center. And our son is one of those, and he still works at the museum. But I know the only name I can come up with is Justin Lin, who interned there, I don't know, way before he worked on the Fast and Furious franchise and many other movies that he is, and he's a very well-known director. But John is very generous and continues to be, but has been throughout his career.
John has mentored many young people. Yes. Too many to mention here.
Thank you, Susan.
On that note,
Before we go on, I still think about the MacNut pie. We were in Hawaii a couple of weeks ago. That's what I was mentioning.
John,
I wonder if there's any pie like the one that I experienced on Troubled Paradise.
So before we go,
I wanted to mention to you, Stephen, that it wasn't just you that they made you wait for an interview, because when I first went to VC, I was 24. I was interviewing for a position as continuity on Hito Hata, and I'm sitting in the wait room. It's not just San Francisco people, I'm LA, and you were just caught in one of those marathon collective meetings that they would have, and that would go on for like 5 hours, and I was just sitting there going, what are they doing? So that was the main thing that would always happen at VC, but it's nothing about snubbing San Francisco, and so I just wanted to put that in.
Amy, I think it's only right that you have the last word. So anything you'd like to say or share with the audience before we end the program today?
Well, I just want to say that John always says he can work with anyone. So, he's worked with Christine Choi, who is very notorious for being very difficult, but, through his work, he's traveled throughout the world. We've met many people that, we would never have met, Senator Inoue and Norman Mineta and, all these people that we feel very lucky that through the museum and through VC, that our lives have been enriched by these people's story.
Well, thank you for sharing your lives with us, for being John's partner. John, thank you for sharing all your work with us and everything that you've done.